today we're going to be taking a look at Proverbs 15 verse 1 and talking about anger. So Proverbs 15 verse 1 says this: "A soft answer turns away wrath, and a harsh word stirs up anger." So in this session we're going to have a think about whether or not as Christians we can get angry without sinning. Have a think about it. Is it ever okay to be angry? In the whole of Proverbs 15, it talks about a few different things. The main themes are the use of your tongue or your words. It also talks about submission and instruction. And it also talks about God's governance of the world. So thinking about a harsh word then, what are harsh words? Well, when we translate it, it literally means a word that is hurtful. Have any of you ever said anything hurtful to someone before? We've all been there, haven't we? It's really hard to stay in control sometimes and not hurt someone, especially when they are deliberately trying to hurt you. And words are really powerful things. Words stay with us, sometimes forever. And I'm thinking that most of you will probably think that I'm going to talk to you about the fact that Jesus says to turn the other cheek and that we have to do the same. And there is wisdom in that, but in this session, we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. We're going to question whether it is a sin to be angry and whether it's ever okay to show anger towards other people. So let's draw some parallels then from a different part of the Bible. It's really good practice not to just take a verse at face value. It's really good to put it in context with the canon of the Bible, okay? So what the overall message is. Context is everything when you're looking at the Bible, so just be aware of that. If you are someone that looks at like a single Bible verse rather than a whole Bible passage, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you know the context for it. So an extreme example of that would be, say, Jeremiah 15 verse 6, okay? In that it says this: "You have forsaken me, declares the Lord. You keep going backward. So I will stretch out my hand against you and destroy you. I am tired of relenting." Now, if we were to just take this verse at face value, that could actually be quite a frightening concept. But we know that when you put the verse into context with the rest of the Bible, we remember that actually God came up with a plan to save us through Jesus. It doesn't seem so bleak anymore. So it's all about the context. Context is really important. So the first thing that I want to look at is the story of Jesus getting angry and turning the tables at the temple. Let's have a read. So this comes from John 2:13-17, and it says this: "The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, 'Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade.' His disciples remember that it is written, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.'" This story is quite controversial amongst Christians and non-Christians, because as Christians we tend to think that in order to love people, in order to really love your neighbour, we have to be nice to them all the time. Has anyone ever had that thrown at them in an argument? You can't get angry because you're a Christian. There are normally two main things that people draw out of this passage. So the first one is when people say to you during an argument, you can't get angry because you're a Christian. And the second one is when people say, well, even Jesus lost his temper sometimes. But I'm going to suggest something to you, okay? I'm going to suggest that when people say, you're a Christian, you can't get angry, or when people say, well, even Jesus lost control and got angry, I'm going to suggest to you that this is not a very good argument. We're going to deal with the second one first, the even Jesus lost control sometimes argument. And I think that when people say this, it just shows what their expectations of Jesus are. Because of those good old Christmas carols that we sing every year, we sometimes see Jesus as being this meek and mild baby, rather than Jesus, the Saviour and the Judge of the whole world. And this story is a really good reminder of who he is. Some people think that Jesus is being quite emotional or maybe like irrational. And the reason for this is that in the Gospel of Mark, just before he goes to the temple, he curses a fig tree and it withers away and dies. And the cursing of the fig tree is actually really important in this passage because it gives us context as to what Jesus does in the temple, and it helps us to make a bit more sense of it. So context is everything. Now, the fig tree that Jesus curses wasn't in season. You couldn't get any fruit from it. And Jesus probably knew this before he went over to go and get food from it. But he did what all good teachers do. He used it to make his point. It was a teaching moment. Now, some of you that are listening, you might grow up and become teachers. And what happens is every day you see lots of examples all around you that you could use to help you embellish what you're saying. And some of you might already be doing this actually, or recognise it in your own conversations, or recognise it in your teachers. Jesus used lots of different storytelling techniques to get his point across, and this was one of them. In the same way that when Jesus sees the fig tree and curses it, when he goes into the temple immediately afterwards, he doesn't see any fruit in there either, but it's a different kind of fruit that he's looking for in the temple. He's looking for the evidence that people are actively loving and seeking God. He's looking to see that the temple is fulfilling its purpose. But all he sees is materialism and people taking advantage. And from this, we're reminded that ultimately, Jesus is not just the meek and mild baby that we might sing about at Christmas, but actually, Jesus is the judge of the whole world. And here's the thing that we can take away from it. Jesus' attitude towards the temple is also his attitude towards our hearts. So does this mean then that we can kind of use this story to justify the way in which we behave towards other people when we see something that we don't like, or when we're in the middle of an argument? Jesus drove them out of the temple, and this was done with force. They were in his Father's house. They weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. They weren't worshipping God. Jesus had righteous anger. He had a right to be angry. It was his Father's house. And it's wisdom in knowing that actually there's a time and a place for righteous anger. In Proverbs 15:9, it says, "The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves him who pursues righteousness." And that's what we see here. Jesus is pursuing righteousness because the people in the temple with the stalls were taking away the very reason and purpose for the temple. And that reason for the temple was to worship God. Jesus was concerned with the state of the temple. He was concerned with distraction from worshipping God, and so should we. It's our sole purpose to worship God. And I don't know about you, but I think it was right for Jesus to have righteous anger. Sometimes the problem with Christianity is in thinking that we have to be soft and we have to be relevant for people, relevant for society today. But soft words are about our devotions to Jesus and not about trying to appeal to other people. We have to seek righteousness because God requires it. Seek his kingdom first and his righteousness, and all these things will be added onto you. You can't always appeal to people because actually we're called to repent and it's our responsibility to tell people about the judgment that's coming. And these things are real and true, and warning people about this is really important. Sometimes the kind of thing to do is to get angry, but only anger through God's righteousness. And you'll notice that Jesus was very much in control. So I would suggest to you that righteous anger can be a good thing. I would say that actually it's okay to rebuke people and correct them in love. And we can get angry without sinning. Jesus is absolutely perfect, and he's a model for us walking in righteousness. And even though he was angry, he had control the whole time. But it's not an excuse for being aggressive or having the opportunity to be right in every given situation. We have to do it out of a place of love and a desire to share the good news. And having said all of that, where does this leave us with our proverb? A soft word turns away wrath. Well, most of the time, I think that a soft word is all that is needed. And I can't tell you the countless of arguments that I've had where somebody has exercised grace with me and given me a soft word rather than shouted back. And I think that there's a time and there's a place for both. But what's important is that you ask for the wisdom to discern what is needed, and that wisdom comes from God. Words that are chosen wisely can promote calm interactions rather than provoking anger, and more importantly, they can encourage people rather than discourage people. And we're called to be encouragers, aren't we? We're called to build one another up. So for the next few days, what I want you to do is just to reflect on this and try and live it out. When we're gentle with other people, when we're gentle with our words, a rightly spoken word, it can bring life. Our words have so much power, but more importantly, it can bring healing to people. It can give them permission to calm down, to see God in that given situation, and give them the perspective that they need. And it's our responsibility that when we rebuke people, we do it in love. That doesn't mean that we need to tell lies. It's always important to speak the truth and to do that gently. So thanks for watching this video, and remember to check out all the other wisdom videos in the series. And wherever you're at today, I pray that you will have the opportunity to practically apply God's wisdom to your life. I'll see you soon.